The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as three university friends gathered behind the old stone wall. Marcus wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans. Watching the red-coated guards march in perfect formation, Sarah checked her phone for the 100th time, while Danny adjusted the fake mustache that kept slipping down his face. "This is absolutely mental," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of tourists chattering nearby. "We could get arrested for this." Marcus grinned, the same mischievous smile that had gotten them into trouble since their first year at Oxford. "Relax, it's April 1st. Everyone expects pranks today. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? They tell us to move along?" Danny pulled out a small speaker from his backpack, the device no bigger than a smartphone. "My cousin Tom works security here. He told me the guards have to stand completely still no matter what happens. It's like a game to tourists. They try to make them laugh or move." The plan seemed simple enough. Danny would hide behind the tourist crowd and play silly sound effects through the tiny speaker. Sarah would film everything on her phone for their social media accounts. Marcus would act as the lookout, ready to signal if any real security approached. Just a harmless prank to celebrate April Fool's Day. What they didn't know was that this particular morning was different. Queen Elizabeth II was scheduled for an unannounced visit to inspect the guard. The security protocols had been quietly elevated, and every unusual activity was being monitored through hidden cameras by a team of highly trained professionals. As the clock tower chimed 9 a.m., the three friends took their positions. The royal guard stood at attention, their tall black hats creating perfect silhouettes against the ancient castle walls. Dozens of tourists milled about, snapping photos and chatting in various languages. Danny crouched behind a group of Japanese tourists, his finger hovering over the play button. The speaker was designed for pranks. It could project sound in specific directions, making it seem like the noise was coming from somewhere else entirely. He had loaded it with ridiculous sound effects, cartoon boings, animal noises, and silly musical tunes. Marcus positioned himself near the main pathway, pretending to read a guidebook while keeping one eye on the approaching crowd. Sarah found the perfect spot with a clear view of the guards, her phone already recording. Everything seemed to be falling into place. The first guard they targeted was young, probably no older than 25. He stood perfectly straight, his rifle held at precisely the correct angle, his face a mask of professional composure. Danny pressed play and a loud moo sound echoed across the courtyard. Several tourists looked around in confusion. A few laughed, thinking someone was making the noise themselves. The guard's eye twitched slightly, but he remained motionless. Danny grinned and tried another sound, this time a squeaky toy noise that seemed to come from directly beside the guard's left ear. Sarah zoomed in with her phone camera, capturing the guard's struggle to maintain his composure. This was exactly the kind of content that would go viral on TikTok. She imagined the thousands of likes and shares they would get. Marcus checked his watch. They had planned to keep the prank going for exactly 5 minutes, then disappear into the crowd before anyone could figure out what was happening. But as he watched the tourists' reactions, he noticed something concerning. Several people in dark suits had appeared at the edges of the crowd, and they weren't looking amused. Danny was completely absorbed in his prank, cycling through different sound effects, a duck quacking, a car horn honking, the sound of someone snoring loudly. Each noise seemed to come from a different location around the guard, who was now visibly struggling to maintain his stoic expression. What the three friends couldn't see was the flurry of activity happening in the castle's security command center. Multiple screens showed their every move from different angles. Radio communications crackled as personnel tried to identify the source of the disturbance. The head of security, a stern woman named Commander Patricia Hayes, studied the footage with growing concern. "We have 3 individuals engaging in suspicious behavior near the Queen's Guard," she spoke into her radio. "Unknown device in use. Potential security threat. Prepare for immediate intervention." As Danny prepared to play what he thought would be the final sound effect, a recording of circus music, Marcus caught sight of uniformed security officers moving through the crowd. His stomach dropped. These weren't the friendly castle guides who usually helped tourists find the gift shop. These were serious-looking individuals with earpieces, and the kind of alert expressions that suggested they meant business. Sarah was still filming, completely unaware that she was also being filmed by professional surveillance equipment. She giggled as the guard finally broke character slightly, a small smile creeping across his face as a particularly ridiculous sound effect played. The moment Marcus realized their harmless prank was about to become something much more serious was when he saw the first officer speak into his radio while pointing directly at Danny's hiding spot. The casual April Fool's joke they had planned during a late-night study session was rapidly evolving into a situation none of them had anticipated. Danny pressed play one final time, unleashing a sound effect of someone yelling "surprise" at maximum volume. The sound echoed off the castle walls, causing every tourist in the immediate area to turn and look around in confusion. That was the moment everything changed. The surprise echo had barely faded when Commander Hayes gave the signal. Within seconds, 6 plainclothes security officers emerged from the crowd like shadows materializing in daylight. They moved with practiced precision, each one knowing exactly where to position themselves to prevent any chance of escape. Danny looked up from behind the Japanese tourists, just in time to see a tall man in a gray suit approaching him with purposeful steps. The fake mustache suddenly felt ridiculous on his face. His hands trembled as he tried to shove the speaker back into his backpack, but his fingers wouldn't cooperate properly. "Excuse me, sir," the officer said calmly, his voice carrying an authority that made nearby tourists step back. "I need you to slowly place that device on the ground and step away from it." Sarah's phone was still recording, but now she was capturing something entirely different from what she had planned. Through her screen, she watched in horror as more officers surrounded her friends. The playful morning had transformed into something that looked like a scene from a crime drama. Marcus dropped his guidebook and started walking quickly toward the castle exit, hoping to blend in with a group of German tourists. But his path was blocked by a woman with short blonde hair and steel-gray eyes who seemed to appear from nowhere. "Stop right there," Commander Hayes said, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "All 3 of you need to remain exactly where you are." The Japanese tourists who had unknowingly provided Danny's cover began taking photos of the unfolding drama. Thinking it was some kind of special demonstration, other visitors gathered around, whispering excitedly in different languages. Someone asked if this was part of the changing of the guard ceremony. Danny's face had gone completely white. "Look, this is just a misunderstanding. We were just having a bit of fun. It's April 1st, you know. April Fool's Day." The officer examining the speaker held it up like evidence at a crime scene. "This device was used to create unauthorized sound disturbances in a high-security area during a period of elevated threat assessment. You'll need to come with us for questioning." Sarah finally stopped recording, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped her phone. "Questioning? What kind of questioning? We haven't done anything illegal, have we?" Marcus felt his mouth go dry as he looked around at the faces surrounding them. These weren't the friendly castle staff members who posed for photos with children. These people looked like they dealt with much more serious threats than university students playing pranks. "The nature of your device and its capabilities need to be thoroughly examined," Commander Hayes explained, signaling for the speaker to be placed in an evidence bag. "Any electronic device capable of projecting sound in our secure areas is treated as a potential security risk until proven otherwise." What the 3 friends didn't understand was that their timing couldn't have been worse. Just 40 minutes earlier, intelligence reports had indicated possible protest activities planned for various royal locations across London. The castle's security team was already on high alert when Danny's prank began. As they were escorted through a side entrance most tourists never see, Sarah caught a glimpse of the enormous security operation hidden behind Windsor Castle's public face. Corridors lined with monitors, uniformed personnel speaking into radios, and technology that looked far more advanced than anything she had ever seen in movies. The room they were taken to was nothing like the interrogation rooms shown on television. It was clean, well-lit, and surprisingly comfortable, with soft chairs and a table that looked like it belonged in a business conference room. But the 2 cameras mounted in opposite corners left no doubt about the seriousness of their situation. Commander Hayes sat across from them with a tablet and what appeared to be a thick file folder. "I need to understand exactly what you were doing out there, why you chose this location, and whether anyone else was involved in planning this activity." Danny tried to explain about their innocent April Fool's prank, but his words came out jumbled and nervous. Sarah kept apologizing repeatedly, while Marcus sat in stunned silence, trying to process how quickly their morning had gone wrong. The device you used, Hayes continued, studying her tablet, appears to be a directional sound projector. These devices have been used in more serious security incidents. We need to verify that your intentions were purely recreational. The word recreational hung in the air like a foreign concept. What had seemed like harmless fun an hour earlier now sounded naive and potentially criminal when described in official language. An officer entered the room carrying Danny's backpack and Sarah's phone. We'll need to examine all devices and any related materials. This includes any planning documents, messages, or social media posts related to today's activities. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized they would see all her TikTok drafts and Instagram stories. More importantly, they would discover the group chat, where they had jokingly referred to their plan as Operation Annoy the Guards and made several references to infiltrating royal security. Marcus finally found his voice. How much trouble are we actually in? I mean, realistically, what's the worst-case scenario here? Commander Hayes looked at him with an expression that was neither sympathetic nor harsh, just professional. That depends entirely on what our investigation reveals about your activities, your device, and your intentions. Royal security incidents are taken very seriously, regardless of the original motivation. The weight of their situation was beginning to sink in. This wasn't going to end with a warning and a funny story to tell their friends back at university. Phone calls would need to be made to parents, professors, and possibly lawyers. Their names would likely end up in official reports and government databases. As if reading their thoughts, Hayes continued, Your families will be contacted, and your university will be informed of this incident. Depending on our findings, there may be additional consequences through your academic institution. The three friends exchanged glances that communicated everything they couldn't say out loud. Their simple prank had somehow escalated into a genuine security investigation that would follow them far beyond this room. The next 4 hours passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Each of the three friends was interviewed separately, their stories cross-checked for consistency. Technical experts examined Danny's speaker with the kind of attention usually reserved for evidence in major criminal cases. Marcus found himself sitting across from Detective Inspector James Mitchell, a man whose calm demeanor somehow made the situation feel even more serious. Mitchell had been investigating security threats for 15 years, and his questions cut straight to the heart of everything Marcus had hoped they wouldn't discover. Your group chat messages from last week are quite interesting, Mitchell said, scrolling through printed screenshots. You wrote, and I quote, "Time to show these royal guards what real entertainment looks like. Can you explain what you meant by that?" Marcus's stomach dropped. What had seemed like harmless joking between friends now looked like evidence of premeditated disruption of royal security. That was just us being silly. You know how friends talk when they're planning something fun. We never meant anything serious by it. Meanwhile, Sarah was discovering that her social media presence was under microscopic examination. The investigator assigned to her case, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Sarah Chen, had pulled up months of her Instagram posts, TikTok videos, and Twitter interactions. You've posted quite frequently about royal family events, Chen observed, showing Sarah her own posts on a tablet screen. You seem to have strong opinions about monarchy and privilege. Some might interpret your recent activities as a form of political protest. Political protest? Sarah's voice cracked slightly. I was just trying to make a funny video. I post about everything. Celebrity gossip, university drama, fashion trends. The royal stuff was just because my friends thought it was interesting. In the third interview room, Danny was learning that his technical expertise was actually making things worse for him. Detective Robert Barnes, a specialist in electronic crimes, was far too knowledgeable about sound projection devices for Danny's comfort. This particular model, Barnes explained, holding up the speaker, is often used by protesters to create confusion during demonstrations. It can project sound up to 50 meters away and make it appear to come from a completely different location. Where exactly did you purchase this device? Danny's face flushed red. I bought it online for a film project last semester. We were making a short movie that needed special sound effects. I kept it because I thought it was cool technology. I never used it for protests or anything like that. What the three friends didn't know was that their case had attracted attention from much higher levels of royal security. Assistant Commissioner Victoria Sterling, who normally dealt with threats against senior royals, had personally reviewed their file and requested additional background checks. The investigation had uncovered several concerning coincidences. Danny's cousin Tom, who worked castle security, had recently been flagged for sharing too much information about guard schedules with family members. Sarah's university dissertation focused on modern resistance movements and digital activism. Marcus had attended 2 political demonstrations in London within the past 6 months. Individual, none of these facts meant anything sinister. Together, they created a pattern that professional security analysts couldn't ignore. Commander Hayes received an update on her secure phone that made her pause mid-sentence during a briefing. The device analysis is complete. The speaker contains modified firmware that wasn't part of the original manufacturing specifications. This discovery changed everything. What had appeared to be a simple prank now involved a deliberately altered electronic device used in a royal security zone. The technical modification meant someone with advanced knowledge had prepared the equipment specifically for this type of activity. Danny had no idea that his film school friend Jake, who had improved the speaker's capabilities as a favor, had actually created what security experts would classify as a potentially dangerous surveillance device. Jake had simply boosted the projection range and added frequency options that would make the sound effects more realistic. Back in the interview rooms, the questions became more specific and more concerning. Each friend was asked to provide detailed timelines of their activities over the past month. Phone records were being subpoenaed. Social media accounts were being preserved for forensic analysis. Marcus was asked about his political science coursework, specifically his recent essay titled Civil Disobedience in Modern Democratic Societies. Sarah had to explain her friendship with several activists she had met during climate change demonstrations. Danny was questioned extensively about his technical skills and his connections in the university's engineering department. The 3 friends were also learning about consequences they had never considered. Their university had already been contacted and was conducting its own internal investigation. Student disciplinary procedures were being initiated alongside the criminal investigation. Their academic futures were now in question. Sarah's parents called her mobile phone 14 times before she was allowed to answer. When she finally spoke to her mother, the conversation was brief and devastating. "Your father and I are driving up from Brighton immediately. Don't say anything else to anyone until we arrive with a lawyer." Marcus discovered that news of their detention had somehow reached social media. Students at Oxford were already posting about the Windsor Three and speculating about what they had done. Some posts praised them as heroes standing up to royal privilege. Others condemned them as idiots who had embarrassed the university. Danny's technical background, which he had always considered his greatest strength, was now being used to paint him as the mastermind of a sophisticated operation. The fact that he understood electronics and could modify devices made him appear dangerous rather than clever. As the afternoon wore on, the initial shock began wearing off, replaced by a growing understanding of how serious their situation had become. This wasn't going to be resolved with apologies and promises never to do it again. Commander Hayes finally returned to address all 3 of them together. "Based on our preliminary investigation, you'll be released on police bail pending further inquiries. This means you're free to leave, but you must return for additional questioning as required, and you cannot leave the country without permission." The words police bail hit them like physical blows. This was real. They were now officially part of the criminal justice system, with restrictions on their freedom and permanent records of their detention. The taxi ride back to Oxford was silent, except for the sound of Sarah quietly crying in the back seat. Each of them stared out different windows, trying to process what their lives had become in the space of a single morning. Their phones buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family, and people they barely knew, who had somehow heard about their situation. Marcus was the first to break the silence. "We need to figure out what we're going to tell everyone. The story is already spreading and most of it isn't true." By the time they reached campus, the Windsor 3 was trending on several social media platforms. The narrative had taken on a life of its own, with some people painting them as freedom fighters challenging royal authority, while others condemned them as privileged students who had wasted police resources with their stupidity. Danny's phone rang as they walked through the college gates. His cousin Tom's name appeared on the screen, and Danny's hand shook as he answered. Tom's voice was tight with stress and anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" Tom's words came fast and harsh. They've suspended me pending a full investigation. 23 years I've worked security. Never had so much as a written warning, and now they think I might have been feeding information to troublemakers. The guilt hit Danny like a physical weight. His harmless prank had destroyed his cousin's career, the man who had helped pay for Danny's university textbooks when money was tight. "Tom, I'm so sorry." "I never thought—" "No, you didn't think," Tom interrupted. "None of you thought about anything beyond getting likes on social media. Do you know what suspension without pay means for someone with 3 kids and a mortgage?" Sarah was discovering her own ripple effects. Her student accommodation was surrounded by reporters when she tried to return to collect her things. Neighbors she had never spoken to were giving interviews about her radical political activities, most of which they had completely invented. The university's response was swift and unforgiving. All 3 received official letters requiring them to attend disciplinary hearings within 48 hours. Their student union cards were temporarily suspended, meaning they couldn't access the library, dining halls, or any campus facilities. Professor Elizabeth Hartwell, who had been Marcus's academic advisor since his first year, called him into her office that evening. Her usual warm smile was replaced by an expression of deep disappointment that hurt worse than any anger could have. "Marcus, I've known you for 3 years. I've watched you grow from an uncertain first-year student into someone I thought had genuine intellectual promise. I'm struggling to understand how someone of your intelligence could have made such catastrophically poor decisions." Marcus sat in the chair where he had once eagerly discussed his thesis, plans, and career ambitions. Now those same ambitions seemed laughably naive. "Professor Hartwell, it honestly started as just a silly prank. We never intended for any of this to happen. Intentions matter very little now," she replied, pulling out a thick folder. "The university has received calls from government officials, security agencies, and media outlets. Your actions have created a diplomatic incident that reaches far beyond your personal consequences." The diplomatic incident she referred to was becoming clear through news reports that evening. International media were covering the story as an example of growing disrespect toward British institutions. Security experts were using their case to argue for stricter penalties for breaching royal security. Politicians were calling for reviews of university oversight of student activities. Sarah's parents arrived that evening with a criminal defense lawyer, whose first words were not reassuring. "This is more serious than typical student misconduct. The charges you're potentially facing could result in prison sentences and permanent criminal records that will affect your employment prospects for the rest of your lives." The lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Helen Morrison, spread out documents across Sarah's small dorm room table. "The Crown Prosecution Service is treating this as a case of conspiracy to commit a breach of royal security. The modified electronic device elevates the charges significantly." Danny learned that his film school friend Jake was also being investigated. The modifications Jake had made to the speaker, which had seemed so helpful for their movie project, were now being analyzed by experts in electronic surveillance and potential terrorism equipment. Jake called Danny that night, his voice shaking with panic. "They came to my flat with a search warrant. They took all my computers, my phone, all my electronics projects. They're treating me like I'm some kind of bomb maker." "What did you tell them about the speaker modifications?" "I told them the truth," Danny replied, though he was beginning to realize that truth and perception were very different things in criminal investigations. "I said you helped me improve it for our film project." "Our film project was a comedy short about talking animals," Jake said bitterly. "Now they're asking me about my technical capabilities and whether I've ever been contacted by any anti-government groups. Do you understand what you've done to both of us?" The 3 friends met in a small cafe near campus the next morning, their first time together since being released on bail. They looked exhausted and defeated, nothing like the excited conspirators who had planned their April Fool's prank just days earlier. "My dad says we need to prepare for the worst-case scenario," Sarah said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "The lawyer thinks they might make an example of us because of all the media attention." Marcus had dark circles under his eyes. "I keep thinking about how different everything would be if we had just stayed in bed that morning. If we had chosen literally any other day for our prank, if we had picked any other location." Danny was staring at his phone, reading the latest news articles about their case. "Look at this headline. University students planned sophisticated attack on royal security. They're making us sound like terrorists." The cafe suddenly felt too public, too exposed. Other students were staring at them, some taking photos with their phones. They had become campus celebrities for all the wrong reasons. Their legal troubles were just beginning. The investigation was expanding to include forensic analysis of all their digital communications, background checks on their families and friends, and detailed examinations of their academic work for any signs of anti-establishment sentiment. What had started as three friends wanting to create a funny video had become a case study in how quickly modern life could be turned upside down by a single moment of poor judgment. Their story was being discussed in Parliament, analyzed by security experts, and used as evidence for new legislation about protecting royal facilities. None of them could have imagined that their names would soon be permanently recorded in government databases, their faces recognized by security personnel across London, and their futures determined by decisions they had made in less than 5 minutes on a sunny April morning. 3 weeks after their arrest, the three friends sat in a formal courtroom that smelled of old wood and nervous sweat. The preliminary hearing was supposed to determine whether their case would proceed to Crown Court, but it felt more like a public execution of their reputations and futures. The prosecutor, a stern-faced woman named Patricia Whitmore, presented their case with the kind of detailed precision that made their prank sound like a carefully planned assault on national security. She displayed enlarged photographs of the speaker device, highlighted portions of their group chat messages, and referenced expert testimony about the potential dangers of modified audio equipment in secure areas. The defendants demonstrated clear premeditation, Whitmore stated, gesturing toward the three friends. They researched guard schedules through inside information, modified electronic equipment to enhance its capabilities, and coordinated their activities to maximize disruption during a period of elevated royal security protocols. Each word felt like a hammer blow. Danny watched his parents in the gallery, his mother's face pale with worry, his father sitting rigidly upright with the kind of controlled anger that was somehow worse than shouting. Sarah's younger sister had taken time off from her own university studies to attend, her presence a painful reminder of how this scandal was affecting their entire family. Marcus's barrister, an experienced defense lawyer named Jonathan Reed, stood to present their side of the story. His task was nearly impossible, to convince the court that their actions were innocent without ignoring the serious security concerns they had inadvertently raised. Your Honor, we're dealing with three young people whose poor judgment led to an unfortunate incident, but whose intentions were entirely harmless. They are guilty of being foolish, not of being dangerous. The magistrate, an elderly woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, studied the case files with the kind of attention that made everyone in the courtroom hold their breath. Her decision would determine whether they faced minor penalties or serious criminal charges that could result in prison sentences. Meanwhile, the media circus outside the courthouse had grown beyond anything they could have imagined. News vans lined the street. Reporters thrust microphones at anyone entering or leaving the building. And protesters had gathered, with signs both supporting and condemning the three. Students. One group carried banners reading "Students Against Royal Privilege" and treated the three friends like heroes of democratic resistance. Another group held signs declaring "Respect our institutions" and called for harsh penalties to send a message about proper behavior around royal facilities. The strangest development was that their case had attracted international attention. News outlets from America, Australia, Canada, and other Commonwealth countries were covering the story as an example of changing attitudes toward monarchy among young people. Academic experts were writing papers about their case as a symbol of generational conflict with traditional authority. Dr. Amanda Foster, a criminology professor at Cambridge University, had published an article titled "The Windsor Incident: When Digital Age Pranks Meet Ancient Protocols." Her analysis suggested that their case represented a clash between modern social media culture and centuries-old security traditions that neither side fully understood. Back in the courtroom, technical experts were explaining the capabilities of Danny's modified speaker in language that made it sound like a weapon rather than a prank device. The prosecution's electronics specialist described how the device could theoretically be used for surveillance, misdirection during security incidents, or psychological manipulation of guards and officials. The firmware modifications discovered in this device are consistent with equipment used by professional surveillance operations. the expert testified. While the defendants may have intended it for harmless purposes, the capabilities they created pose genuine security risks. Sarah's barrister, attempting damage control, called character witnesses who testified about her academic achievements, volunteer work with local charities, and complete lack of any previous legal troubles. But their glowing testimonials seemed inadequate against the weight of security concerns and media attention. The university had conducted its own investigation and reached its own conclusions. All 3 students received letters informing them that they were being suspended for the remainder of the academic year, pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. Their academic futures were now entirely dependent on legal decisions beyond their control. Danny's cousin, Tom, had been permanently dismissed from his security position despite 23 years of spotless service. The investigation concluded that he had violated protocols by discussing guard procedures with family members, even though his conversations had been completely innocent and unrelated to any security threats. Tom's dismissal created another layer of guilt and family tension that Danny struggled to process. At a tense family gathering, Tom's wife made it clear that she blamed Danny for destroying their financial security. 23 years of loyal service gone because you wanted to make a stupid video for the internet. The friends were also learning about consequences they had never anticipated. Background checks for future employment would forever show their arrest and investigation for security-related offenses. Graduate school applications would require detailed explanations of their criminal proceedings. International travel would involve additional scrutiny and potential restrictions. Marcus discovered that several job opportunities he had been pursuing were quietly withdrawn after employers learned about his legal situation. Companies that had seemed interested in hiring him for summer internships suddenly stopped returning his calls or emails. Sarah's social media accounts, once filled with thousands of followers interested in her content about student life and activism, became battlegrounds for political arguments she had never intended to start. Every post was analyzed for hidden meanings, and every photo was scrutinized for evidence of her political beliefs. The psychological toll was becoming obvious to everyone around them. Sarah stopped attending social events and spent most of her time alone in her room. Marcus developed insomnia and lost significant weight from stress and poor appetite. Danny became withdrawn and defensive, snapping at friends who tried to offer support or advice. Their legal team explained that even if they avoided prison sentences, they were facing the possibility of criminal records that would affect them for decades. Certain career paths would be permanently closed to them. Some countries would restrict their travel rights. Professional licenses in fields like teaching, law, or security would be difficult or impossible to obtain. The magistrate finally announced her decision after reviewing all evidence and testimony. Her words would determine whether their prank would result in minor consequences or life-changing penalties that would follow them for years to come. This court must balance the defendant's obvious lack of malicious intent against the serious security concerns their actions raised during a time of heightened royal protection protocols, she began, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority that would reshape 3 young lives with a few carefully chosen sentences. The magistrate's gavel fell with finality that echoed through the silent courtroom. Given the defendants' clean prior records, their obvious remorse, and evidence that their actions, while reckless, were not motivated by malicious intent, this court sentences each defendant to 200 hours of community service, a fine of £3,000, and 18 months of supervised probation. The relief that washed over the 3 friends was immediately tempered by the realization that their ordeal was far from over. While they had avoided prison sentences, the consequences would follow them for years. The criminal records would remain permanent fixtures in their lives, affecting everything from job applications to rental agreements. Sarah burst into tears, her mother rushing from the gallery to embrace her. The community service sentence meant spending nearly 5 months of weekends working in homeless shelters, food banks, and community cleanup projects. The fine represented months of their student loan money, leaving them financially struggling for the remainder of their university careers. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy continued. Reporters shouted questions about their future plans, their feelings about the sentence, and their advice for other young people. The 3 friends pushed through the crowd with their heads down, their lawyers creating a protective barrier against the cameras and microphones. Marcus discovered that avoiding prison was only the beginning of rebuilding his life. Graduate school applications required detailed explanations of his criminal conviction. Despite his excellent academic record, several programs rejected him outright because of the security-related nature of his offense. The community service assignment turned out to be more meaningful than any of them had expected. Working in a homeless shelter in East London, Sarah met people whose problems made her own troubles seem manageable. An elderly man named George, who had been living on the streets for 3 years, listened to her story without judgment and offered perspective she hadn't anticipated. "Mistakes don't define you unless you let them," George told her while they served lunch to dozens of people who had nowhere else to go. "What matters is what you learn and how you help others avoid the same problems." Danny's technical skills, which had gotten him into trouble, became valuable assets during his community service at a youth center in South London. He taught computer programming to teenagers from disadvantaged backgrounds, many of whom saw technology as their only path out of poverty. One of his students, a 15-year-old named Jamal, reminded Danny why he had loved technology in the first place. "You made a mistake, but you're using what you know to help people now. That's what counts." The friends gradually rebuilt their relationship with each other, though it took months of difficult conversations and professional counseling to work through the resentment and blame that had developed during their legal crisis. Marcus completed his degree a year behind his original schedule, but his experience had given him a deeper understanding of criminal justice and social policy that influenced his career direction. Instead of pursuing corporate law as originally planned, he decided to focus on public defense work, representing people who couldn't afford expensive legal representation. Sarah's social media presence evolved dramatically. Instead of lifestyle content and political commentary, she began documenting her community service experiences and advocating for criminal justice reform. Her follower count decreased significantly, but her engagement became more meaningful as she connected with people interested in social change rather than entertainment. The university eventually allowed all 3 students to return and complete their degrees, though they remained on academic probation and were prohibited from participating in certain activities and organizations. Their professors treated them with a mixture of disappointment and cautious respect for how they had handled the consequences of their actions. Danny's cousin, Tom, never forgave him for the loss of his security career, creating permanent tension in family gatherings and relationships. Tom eventually found work as a private security guard, but at significantly lower pay, and with none of the pride and stability he had enjoyed in his royal service. 2 years after the incident, unexpected developments began to emerge. A documentary filmmaker named Rebecca Chen had been following their story, interested in how a simple prank had escalated into a national security incident that exposed gaps between traditional institutions and digital age realities. The documentary, titled The April Fool's Effect, premiered at the London Film Festival and sparked renewed discussion about proportionate responses to security incidents. Several legal experts interviewed for the film argued that the case had been handled too harshly, while security professionals maintained that any breach of royal protocol required serious consequences. Marcus found that his criminal record, rather than destroying his legal career, had given him unique credibility when representing clients who had made serious mistakes. His personal experience with the criminal justice system helped him connect with defendants in ways that other lawyers couldn't match. During one particularly difficult case, representing a young mother charged with benefit fraud, Marcus realized how his own experience had prepared him for this moment. "I understand what it's like when one mistake threatens to define your entire future," he told his client. "But I also learned that you can build something meaningful from the worst situations." Sarah's community service evolved into a permanent commitment to social activism, but with a more mature understanding of effective advocacy. She established a non-profit organization focused on helping young people navigate legal troubles and avoid the mistakes she and her friends had made. Her organization, called Second Chances, provided legal literacy workshops in schools and universities, teaching students about the real-world consequences of actions that might seem harmless or rebellious. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now the adult warning young people against exactly the kind of reckless behavior she had engaged in. Danny's path proved the most unexpected. His experience with modified electronics and security systems led to consulting work with companies trying to identify vulnerabilities in their own security protocols. His ability to think like someone who might circumvent security, combined with his first-hand understanding of the consequences, made him valuable to organizations seeking to prevent, rather than punish, security breaches. He eventually started his own cybersecurity firm, specializing in ethical penetration testing and security awareness training. His criminal record, rather than hindering his career, became part of his professional credibility. Clients trusted him to find weaknesses because he had personal experience with both sides of security issues. The three friends met annually on April 1st, not to celebrate their infamous prank, but to reflect on how profoundly their lives had changed from those 5 minutes of poor judgment. Their friendship had survived, though it was forever marked by the shared experience of watching their futures nearly destroyed by a single moment of thoughtless fun. 5 years after the incident, they received an unexpected invitation. Commander Patricia Hayes, who had led the investigation into their prank, requested a meeting to discuss their case as part of a security training program she was developing. "Your case taught us important lessons about threat assessment and proportional response," Hayes explained during their meeting at a quiet London cafe. "We want to use your experience to help train security personnel to distinguish between genuine threats and misguided pranks before situations escalate unnecessarily." The conversation was surreal. The woman who had once treated them as potential security threats was now asking for their help in improving the system that had nearly destroyed their lives. They agreed to participate in the training program, sharing their story with security professionals across the UK. Their involvement in security training led to consultations with other law enforcement agencies dealing with similar incidents. Social media pranks targeting government facilities had become increasingly common, and their case provided valuable insights into handling such situations with appropriate seriousness, without destroying young lives unnecessarily. Marcus completed his law degree and was eventually accepted into a prestigious master's program in criminal justice reform. His thesis, Proportional Response in Security Incidents, Lessons from the Windsor Case, became required reading in several university programs. Sarah's nonprofit expanded internationally, with chapters in universities across Europe and North America. Her work prevented dozens of students from making similar mistakes, and she became a sought-after speaker on topics of youth activism, digital citizenship, and learning from serious mistakes. Danny's security firm grew into a successful business employing over 30 people, many of whom were individuals with criminal records who had struggled to find employment elsewhere. He discovered that people with personal experience of legal troubles often made the most conscientious and careful employees. The speaker device that had started everything was eventually donated to a museum exhibit about modern security challenges and digital age protests. Visitors could read about how a simple prank device had triggered an international incident and changed multiple lives forever. 10 years later, their story was studied in Sikendui,